host, Lavender, and today's episode is a very unique and exciting one. At some point during this podcast, I wanted to analyze or deep dive into different horror or supernatural themed movies or shows, and today we'll be doing exactly that. So buckle up and let's head back to the 2000s, more specifically 2005, into the world of Supernatural. Now, this TV show has a handful of complex character archetypes to choose from, with humans, angels, demons, and of course, monsters. However, today's episode is focused on one of the main characters we all know and love. If you thought of Sam, I'm sorry, though if you thought of the second brother, Dean, then you're a great guesser and read my mind. I would also like to note as we move forward with this episode, I don't have a degree in psychology or really know anything of that sort. Anything I say in this episode is based on what is shown throughout the show and what the fandom as a whole has come up with and thought. Dean, out of all the characters in this show, is the more complex one, which is why he's so interesting to analyze, and also because he is one of my all-time favorite characters on this show. Dean is known as the protective older brother who also doesn't seem to take things too seriously, though that's just the surface level of his character as a whole. Like I said before, today we aren't just looking at the surface level of this character and how he's portrayed, but rather the deeper emotional and mental aspects that become more prevalent throughout the duration of this show. How he looks at relationships, friendships, hunting, and of course his own life and life in general. Now, before we get too deep into this video, there will be spoilers, so if by some chance you haven't watched this show and you're either watching it currently or wanting to watch it, this episode isn't for you. Though I assume if you are watching or listening to this episode, then you already know a lot about this show and the characters on it. Before we deep dive into the character analysis part of this episode, let's cover a brief backstory of Dean Winchester. He was born January 24th, 1979 to the parents of John and Mary Winchester. Though unlike some kids, Dean's childhood was already struck by tragedy as Mary was killed in a fire by supernatural forces. This same force is what drove John to seek out revenge on whatever had killed Mary. In doing so, he also dragged Dean and his younger brother Sam into their hunting lifestyle. Because of this, not only did Dean assume the caretaker role at the young age of 4 years old, but he also spent his childhood living in motel rooms and cars. Being the older brother, he was forced into the caretaker role for Sam, acting as the parent and emotional anchor for his younger brother, while John became distant and consumed by vengeance for what happened to Mary. During this, he learned how to fight monsters and shoot a gun before he was old enough to process his emotions properly. This would carry on into his adult life and continue to follow him even then. As an adult, he became very skilled, sarcastic, and outwardly confident, thus masking his deep emotional wounds beneath humor.
Dean, what are you doing?
Comforting the bereaved. What are you doing?
Working. Dead body, possible demon attack, that kind of stuff.
Sam, I'm sorry, just, I don't have much time left, and, gotta make every second count.
Because of the early role as caretaker, he repeatedly sacrifices his own safety, happiness, and early in the show his own soul to save his brother. We begin to see throughout the show how much loss, grief, guilt, betrayal, and trauma that start up to build rather than heal, and yet he continues to fight for the people he loves deeply, even if he doesn't outright show it. Not only does he truly believe that he's the main caretaker of his brother even into adulthood, but also to everyone he loves, which is why he also ends up sacrificing himself in dangerous situations. Dean Winchester isn't a hero who seeks glory or redemption, but rather we see him as a hero shaped by loss, duty, and love. A character that continues to keep going long after the cost becomes personal. Like every complex character, that there's the surface level of perception, and Dean is no different. In the earlier seasons, we see the surface level of Dean's trauma being shown as reckless, angry, toxic masculinity, and martyr complex. This is also played out as the older brother that doesn't take anything too seriously or overthinks certain situations. This isn't just because of the difference in the brother's age, but rather because we are just seeing the beginnings of the trauma that Dean has had to endure. Some example episodes of this are Season 1, Episode 1, The Pilot. In this episode, he's shown as the cocky, womanizing, reckless big brother. This episode is also when we see him push Sam back into the hunter lifestyle even when Sam has built a life outside of his family, as he's in college to become a lawyer. However, what's really happening internally for Dean is his hyperfixation on being the caretaker. Also in this episode, we hear one of his many famous lines, "Dad's on a hunting trip and hasn't been home in a few days." One of the most pivotal lines in the series that underneath the urgency, Dean's fear of being alone without Sam because he doesn't know what else to do. This episode intentionally frames Dean as the fun troublemaker next to his brother's reluctant hero. Season 1, Episode 4, Phantom Traveler. In this episode, we begin to see the first emotional crack in his armor as he has a fear of flying, connecting us to him as not just being the overly sarcastic older brother. It shows us that he does in fact hide his vulnerability behind the armor he's built himself around. This is because on the surface we see him as an overconfident, fearless hunter and begin to step into this I've got this attitude. This episode is key for showing how the tough guy persona is partially a performance. Season 1, Episode 9, Home. This episode ironically hits home for Dean as he has to face their childhood home as well as his mom's spirit for the first time after she died. Because of this, he's shown as someone who's emotionally avoidant and closed off, as he has a hard time agreeing with Sam to go figure out what's happening, as well as talking about what happened that night their mother died. While this is being portrayed, we do get glimpses of his hidden vulnerability, especially in the scene where he wanders off to the bathroom, but instead it calls their father John because he feels like he doesn't know what to do. We start to slowly realize that there may be more to Dean's emotional/mental state than what we thought. This is one of the first hints that Dean's toughness is fragile. Season 1, Episode 11, Scarecrow. We see the more controlling parts of Dean's character as an older brother in this episode, as Sam is forced to stay and follow the rules. While it's more because the thought of losing Sam kills Dean and therefore the protector instinct overrides the communication. This episode solidifies the controlling Dean that's labeled early on in these seasons. Season 1, Episode 16, Shadow. Unlike the controlling part of Dean we see in Scarecrow, we see the aggressive, angry, and impulsive part of his character in this episode, as he tends to act impulsively without ever fully explaining himself, leading him to be more emotionally volatile. However, what's really going on behind the rapidly changing emotions is his acute stress response to intense situations, but also anger being his secondary emotion to masking any kind of fear. This is an early stage example of how his anger is misread as cruelty. Season 1, Episode 18, Something Wicked. This is one of the more pivotal episodes in the early season, as this episode quietly reframes everything about Dean's behavior up to this point. As he becomes overbearing, guilt-ridden, and obsessive, this is the moment where we see his hyperprotective nature turn to an unhealthy degree. Though behind this all is the belief that he cannot ever fail, and if he does, he's then failed everyone he loves. Early Supernatural teaches us to see Dean as reckless and emotionally shallow, but that perception slowly shifts as the show introduces the wounds that he keeps hidden, and even sometimes from his own brother. There are parts of Dean's character regarding his trauma that we see throughout the show, while there are other parts that he chooses to keep hidden, unless he's by himself talking with Sam or Castiel. This isn't because he refuses to fully show himself, but more so because he either doesn't fully understand how to fully feel or explain what he's going through, or he simply doesn't trust someone to fully show up as himself. I've separated the parts we see him fully express and the parts of his complex trauma that he keeps hidden into Part A, the more common parts, and Part B, the hidden parts. We'll first go over the more common parts of his character's trauma. First, let's begin with his childhood trauma and forced adulthood. This is more common because it's essentially the first thing we learn about the difference between the brothers. Sam was pretty much raised by Dean. However, unlike Sam, Dean was raised by John, who after Mary died was distant and would be off hunting for multiple weeks. Not having the common foundational family that every child should have already set him up for a rough childhood. Because John was constantly on hunting trips, he would have to grow up fast and learn how to protect him and his brother in case monsters or anything bad happened to them. This already set Dean's emotional and nervous system into survival mode, just so his brother didn't have to fear anything. Also, this set of events began to shape Dean's sense of responsibility and self-worth, as he put his brother's own life in front of his at an early age already. We see in the show early on that this childhood trauma is seen as having control issues and hypervigilance, as being flaws. However, they're actually survival skills that were learned too early for a child. A major part of his trauma is the protector identity, also known as "I'm fine, I'll handle it." This is shown when danger may be involved, especially if Sam is involved. This is due to the caretaker role that Dean was put into at the early age of 5 or 6. When John started going on hunting trips, because he was always in the caretaker role, he was seen as a sibling that never rests or doesn't get help even when it's severely needed. This also doesn't just affect his brother, but anyone Dean may come into contact with during their own hunting trips. That is until Sam's life is also at risk. When this happens, we see Dean as someone who would willingly continue to put his own life at risk to save or help his brother. An example of this is shown in Season 2, Episode 8, Crossroad Blues. This is after Sam dies during a game or trial with another supernatural being called Yellow Eyes, the same demon who killed Mary. The first thing Dean does after his anger lashes out about failing Sam is to make a deal with a Crossroads demon for a part of his life for Sam's. This also happens to be a pivotal moment for the show, not just the characters. In this protector identity, self-sacrifice is often seen as recklessness, but it's actually rooted in belief that his life has less value. Even though he would protect Sam's life with his own, doesn't mean his emotions are seen in any of these cases, but rather he was taught/believed in repressing his emotion and masculinity conditioning. This was both instilled in him but also gradually learned on his own, as John taught him to man up and not show fear or grief. Hence why whenever Sam and Dean have their moment after they're done with a case, or whenever they're sharing their feelings together, Dean always seems to be seen as emotionally immature or closed off, even to his brother and Castiel. He is seen as emotionally immature because he uses humor, sarcasm, and sometimes even anger as a way to block or cope with whatever emotion is wanting to come out. Because of this, we rarely see him allowing himself to be vulnerable, unless he's either by himself or pushed to a breaking point. Even then, it most likely comes out as anger. Dean's character isn't emotionally shallow, but rather he's emotionally guarded because he wasn't taught how to both express and feel his own emotions. Moving along from what's common or mostly seen to the hidden parts of his character's trauma. These parts we rarely see outright and are usually overshadowed by the common parts. One of the bigger ones is his guilt, shame, and moral injury. These trauma responses are big, but the way they're shown throughout the series leaves it to be often forgotten. This is shown as his character feeling responsible for deaths even if the outcome was unavoidable. Any of the characters that both the brothers got close to ended up dying. He feels as though he failed them because of the caretaker role that he was put in. He proceeds to internalize blame for both supernatural and human losses that occur within the series. One example of this that didn't just affect Dean but also Sam was the death of Charlie. Even if it could have been unavoidable, it still happened, and the way it occurred left Dean not only sad but outright angry as his protector role failed. When this does occur, not only does he spiral, but he also feels tainted or unworthy, like the death or blood is on his hands even if he didn't kill them. The harsh self-judgment he puts himself through is seen as a fuel of destructive decisions or reckless behavior, not selfishness like it's meant to be seen as. Another big part of the trauma Dean has endured throughout his life is something that we see more of in the middle of the season, more predominantly when we begin to see more of Cass. His love, attachment, and fear of abandonment issues. This part of Dean's early trauma of John leaving him in motels and not knowing when he may come back. So now in his adult life, he has a deep-seated fear of getting left behind or replaced by someone else. Something that's not talked outright, but in some scenes is shown, is when Sam tries to figure out a life without Dean, or hunting, and when his brother inevitably finds out, he flips out and shows his anger for Sam because he thinks he replaced him. The fear of abandonment in Dean's character doesn't just stop at his love for his brothers and people close to him like Bobby. It also feeds into his relationships or lack thereof. It isn't until Cass comes in as another character in this show. In this show, he's known as the brother that sleeps around and tends to find someone to hook up with, though this goes farther than he doesn't feel worthy enough to be loved, but because he's always in the survival mode, and this goes into hunting. He believes he can't be in a relationship even if it means he's happy, because the job he does not everyone likes or will agree with, but also he himself doesn't know when he'll ever come back or if he'll ever come back. In a way, turning himself into his father, mostly because that's who raised him, except at least Dean can admit that his job is dangerous instead of ignoring it like his dad did in a way. On the opposite end of the sword, he is in fact the most loyal person who, when it comes to loving someone, whether that is as a family or as a partner, even though it stems from the fear of losing someone he loves. And before we move on from the specific part of his trauma, we cannot not talk about his friendship with Cass. The interesting part of his character that I'll touch on briefly, but could in fact be a whole video in and of itself, but that is his close relationship bordering on an actual relationship with Castiel. I say this because in this show we see that he goes after girls or likes to hook up with girls, but never sees it as an intimate thing until he starts to become close with Castiel. Where he likes girls, he never had a growing connection with someone as he did with Cass. Whether this is because Castiel sees Dean for who he is and not a guarded or reckless person he plays to be. More importantly, and something that's widely recognized within the fandom, is the emotional vulnerability without sexual context that's shown throughout the series, especially near the end. The show gives us moments of long silence, intense eye contact, confessions framed as emotional revelations, and repeat "you matter" affirmations. What makes this connection so powerful is that not only does in this show it's not blatantly stated that they're in a relationship, but rather giving us scenes that may show they love each other without outright showing it. It's a subtext. Dean expresses vulnerability with Cass without the fear of romantic failure. There's no script for Dean here, no learned role, no expectations. This allows emotional honesty he struggles to access elsewhere. Without getting carried away with this topic, because I can, will, and maybe will do it eventually. The bottom line is Dean's relationship with Castiel matters because it's one of the only connections in his life not built on fear, obligations, or survival, but rather it's about being chosen, seen, and allowed to exist without performing heroism. Built around romance or not, that's why it resonates so deeply and why it's impossible to ignore when talking about Dean as a misunderstood hero. Lastly, this one could have gone into part A, but the way it's shown throughout some of the most iconic seasons/episodes, as well as the way he fights, this one being none other than his anger as a secondary emotion. His anger in some cases has marked him as the ultimate hunter/killer. This part of him comes out when he's sent to Purgatory, where he has to fight monsters that are being held within the place. While yes, he's still in survival mode, there is a sense of relief that's slightly shown as he's able to kill without feeling a sense of guilt. Sadly though, the storyline or part of him isn't shown for as long as he's pulled back into the world again. Besides Purgatory Dean, we do see another part of this play out when he takes on the Mark of Cain and then later becomes a demon. This is shown as both anger and emotional freedom. When he takes on the Mark of Cain, later becoming a demon in Season 9 after he gets stabbed by Metatron, we get to see two dominant states that his character plays into. The Mark obviously draws out his explosive anger and violence, as well as the eerie sense of relief, detachment, and even enjoyment from killing people with the first blade and in general. Though looking at this psychologically, this isn't as inconsistent as someone may think. It's actually the end point of Dean's long-term emotional suppression. Focusing on the mark of Cain, Dean, before he becomes a demon, we see his character suppressing grief, fear, shame, and guilt as he doesn't allow himself to feel these emotions due to him never learning to cope with them or feel them properly. Thus, anger being seen as the only solution, functioning as a controlled outlet. Whereas during the mark, the filter that Dean was raised on, his anger no longer is the protection of other emotions, instead it replaces them. These emotions happen when someone can no longer tolerate vulnerability. Anger becomes the next best thing because it feels powerful and numbing at the same time. An important thing to keep in mind when talking about Mark of Cain, Dean, and Demon Dean is the mark doesn't create anger. It removes the barriers keeping it in check, though it's not just the anger that takes full control when he becomes a demon for the short time that he is. We see him more relaxed, smug, and even relieved. It's almost like when the vampires in the Vampire Diaries turn off their humanity. He looks emotionally free from the outside. However, what's really going on is him dissociating from all that he went through and is still actively going through. It's him burning out from all the pain and suffering that he's been put through internally and externally, and a need to escape those feelings. It's at this point in the series that we see Dean choosing to feel nothing rather than feeling everything. This also goes to explain why he was so insistent on not wanting to be fixed by Sam and Cass. Now, could he have told them yes, however in a way that goes against everything that he has believed about himself up to this point? Unlike the other demons in this show that act like actual monsters or the stereotypical bad person, Dean, however, is different. When he does become a demon, it fits into his character so well because he didn't turn a complete 180 from how his character usually acts. He just let go of the guard that was keeping his anger in check. Demon Dean isn't about becoming a monster, it's about what really happens when anger replaces vulnerability and numbness feels like true emotional freedom. Dean's anger as a whole isn't cruelty, but rather it's unprocessed grief, looking for an outlet. When we take a look back throughout the series of the show, we see Dean's character from the outside before we see the truth that's tucked or hidden away. His heroism is messy, loud, and morally uncomfortable. Though when we take a closer look and also watch the whole series, you start to see the truth behind the way he acts. It becomes clear that Dean is heroic in ways our culture doesn't always recognize or reward. For example, let's take the iconic mantra, saving people, hunting things, the family business, and finally dive into why Dean Winchester is in fact a hero. Most heroes in stories, both on screen and in books, are motivated by justice, hope, and a belief in doing good. But not for Dean. Instead, he's motivated by obligation. When hunting monsters or the supernatural, he doesn't believe that he's fixing the world or making it fair. Instead, he believes he's hunting them because he believes he has to, otherwise no one else would. Duty-based heroism is a character just doing his job. He's not stepping up to the plate to do something outside of his character. All he's doing is what he thinks is best. Dean isn't inspired, he's resigned. That resignation gets mistaken for cynicism or lack of compassion. Then, when he goes out with his brother to help out a case, he goes into it expecting to not be thanked, remembered, or even make it out alive, because he knows what's out there in the dark. That's why whenever he does get thanked by someone, he's caught off guard, and begins to act like Dean we see in the earlier seasons, sarcastic and not taking anything seriously. During some cases, he goes after himself time and time again to choose outcomes where others would most likely win. He's the one that suffers the pain, and the cost is invisible. In media of any form, we're used to seeing the hero who wins and walks away. Though for Dean, the hero in this case, his victories often look like losses, so they don't register as heroic. It's important to note throughout the series, as the cases they hunt or monsters they deal with outside of cases, how when he fights them, he also absorbs the consequences. He's someone that remembers the names and faces that he kills, and that he can in some cases blend into guilt that he suppresses when he's done. When he can't save everybody, he starts to internalize the death of that person, often wondering what life really means if we all die in the end, knowing in the back of his mind that he could die anytime he goes and fights a monster, that's also a risk he's willing to take every time. To some people, when he doesn't want to talk about what happened, some may think that means he doesn't care. That's just another case done and solved, but in reality he's thinking of one of two things. That should have been him, that he didn't survive, or how he could have prevented them being killed and gotten them both out. Though looking at the family business part of the mantra, that's where most of the weight Dean bears comes from. The family business isn't a calling, but a burden. For Dean, after John dies, the family business starts to become a legacy that he didn't choose, like the men of letters. Well, he doesn't have to continue to live it and stay, he does because of two reasons. He doesn't want a life without his brother, as that's all he has, but probably most likely he stays out of responsibility. Dean in the show is read as unwilling to grow, when in reality he's choosing responsibility over escape. But also because even though he wants a normal life, where he has his own family, he believes deep down that will never happen. Dean Winchester is misunderstood as a hero because his version and the versions shown throughout the series of saving the world doesn't look like hope or justice, it looks like endurance. His heroism is built on duty, sacrifice, and moral compromise. Things that in the media today we rarely celebrate or even see as heroic. This character, as we've discussed and seen throughout the show, is more complex than what we see on the outside. Which is also why, besides being very attractive in almost everything he does, so many people gravitate to him as one of the comfort fictional characters. Although I may in fact be a little biased. Also, for those wondering, yes, I am back on track and have decided to upload a new episode every month, and on certain months I will also upload a bonus episode. It won't be as long as normal. Won't be as long as normal though. But I hope changing the schedule to this will help better my content turn around, but also the content in which I come out with, so I have more time to research as well as edit the episodes. Don't forget to follow this podcast on Instagram for more behind the curtain updates and info. If you're enjoying the supernatural or learning about the darker aspects of history, then be sure to hit the subscribe and like button so you won't miss out on any more historic tales. It truly helps out this show. And until we meet again, stay spooky and curious.